All right, everybody, here it is. I know that I am eagerly anticipating Eric's thoughts on this film. Um, I know that some people did not like this film when it originally came out. A little bit of history on this film, just real briefly. One of the things that I found interesting about this film is that this film was produced on a relatively modest budget. I actually first read about this film actually in Starlog magazine. I like to talk about, even going back to the Retrospective show, I like to talk about where I first heard about these films. And obviously, that's an important part of a retrospective. So, in a retrospective, what we want to do is we want to start off by talking about how we first heard about the film, our initial impressions of the film, and then we want to talk about how we feel about the film today, having actually recently rewatched it. So here for this
Hold on,
particular,
we need to back up here because we're changing the format a little bit here.
I know.
Okay, so the format's a little bit different. And in this case, what we're doing is this is a recommendation that Dave actually made to me because I've never seen this show. So this is kind of a little. I've never seen this movie, I should say. Sorry, it wasn't a TV show; it's a movie. So I've never seen this, and so it's going to be interesting. So Dave is really going to talk about his experience about this. He's going to let you know why he recommended it to me, why he likes this movie. He talk about its history and all that stuff, and then you're going to hear from me completely fresh because I have never seen this movie before, never heard of it if it wouldn't have been for Dave. So with that, Dave, take it away.
All right. So I first heard about this film in Starlog magazine back in the day. This was featured along with another film called Nemesis, and it was by sort of a young or sort of recently formed production company. They had a feature on this and the other film. Now, I read the story and I thought it sounded interesting. I actually did actually see this movie in movie theaters, everyone. I did actually pay to go see this in movie theaters. I went with a good friend of mine at the time. Um, and we went and saw this film. And I had known a little bit about it. Um, and I found it kind of interesting because they kept referring to quote unquote the rat catcher kind of here and there in the article. They don't really reference that too much in this film at all, if not any, as far as I can. I just recently rewatched this. I'm trying to remember. I don't think they referenced it at all. But it's an interesting idea because it was a villain in the Batman comics at the same time that they used that nomenclature with the rat catcher. So I was very intrigued by this film. And they'd shown some images, and then if you see this film, the monster in the film, because this is kind of like a low budget B horror movie, monster movie. I think that's the best way to describe it. Is sort of a low rent B monster movie. Um, the villain, the monster, is very reminiscent of Venom at the time. And a lot of people who saw it, that's what they kept talking about, is that the villain in this reminded of Venom. Which actually, if you go further back, I think this inspiration for this monster actually comes from some illustrations by H.R. Giger. Actually, if you dial it further back, but I'll set this up just here real briefly, and I'll talk about why I recommended this film and what I like about it, and then we'll see what Eric thought. I think I have a feeling where we're going here, but we're gonna still stay positive here at the moment. So split second. Again, this is an older film. It came out in 1992. It's considered an action crime horror film. Synopsis, just real briefly, it says in a flooded future London, Detective Harley Stone hunts a serial killer who murdered his partner and has haunted him ever since. He soon discovers that what he is hunting might not actually be human. So there's your brief synopsis there. This film was actually directed by Tony Malum. The writer was actually Gary Scott Thompson. Of course, this stars Rutger Hauer. You can tell that by the movie poster. That's the big selling point. Rutger Hauer from Blade Runner and Blind Fury and Hobo the Shotgun. Rutger Hauer's in this movie, everybody. Kim Cattrall is also in this film. Alistair, I think it's Duncan is his name, is in the film. It's an interesting cast because it's Kim Cattrall and Rutger Hauer, I think, are probably the biggest names that most people will be familiar with. So when I saw this film back in the day, I quite enjoyed it. I have a fondness for these sort of this sort of low budget actioner kind of film. If you liked the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie, for example, I think this film kind of sits within that wheelhouse, because it's that sort of kind of low budget action kind of film. I think Punisher has obviously more bullets in it than this movie. But the thing I enjoyed about this film actually is its weird sense of humor it has about itself at time. And I don't know if that's just coming directly from Rutger or if that was just in the script. But someone's bringing, and I think it really is Rutger, is bringing sort of a sense of humor and making this sort of a weird buddy cop movie. And that's the thing that's kind of fun about the film as it moves on, is that eventually, Rutger Hauer's character and his partner, they have this sort of buddy cop sort of humor and banter about themselves, while at the same time taking on this sort of like B movie monster kind of idea. This film does have a cult status. It's quite popular, with those of us who love the film. I've always enjoyed this film. I've recommended it to all kinds of people. Some people like it, some people hate it. The reason I recommended this film is I kept telling Eric, I said, I think you'll like this film because it's a dude's movie. It's a dude movie. And by that, I mean, there's guns, there's action, it's very much a film for dudes. That was my big recommendation. You'll like it because it's a movie for dudes. So enough of my waxing poetic about how much I love the movie Split Second. Tell me, Eric, what did you think about the film Split Second?
Well, there's a couple of comments from the Rogues Gallery. Protronic Films does say this came out in the 90s, right? And that is correct. Came out in 1992, right, Dave? So it is an early 90s
1992.
Film. And he says, I remember vaguely this when I worked in the theater. So when he was actually working at a theater, Matt does remember this film. I have to say, I don't remember this film at all. And I mean at all. When Dave, when you asked me, about this or said, hey, I think this came up before where we were, for those who don't know, at the end of the show, off the air, Dave and I always discuss what we're going to do next week because we try to give ourselves that much time to view that stuff, so that we can do it at our leisure, as our own schedules allow. And I remember this coming up before, and of course back then I didn't have Amazon Prime. So because I didn't have Amazon Prime, it was like, we can't do that. And then, of course, the other issue was typically with the retrospective, the Rogues retrospective format, we follow the old in the studio format, which is another show that Dave used to do, where it's basically a film that we both know about. So we both can kind of talk about what we thought about it back in the day when we were younger, and then we can talk about watching it now. And how does the experience of, when we were younger watching it compare with the experience today? How does it hold up? Well, in this particular case, as I mentioned, we're changing the format a little bit because I've never seen this film. And again, I never even heard of it. It wasn't on my radar at all. So I'm coming at this completely blind, other than what Dave mentioned, that he said, hey, this is a dude's movie, check it out. I really like it. Let's get into it. So the question becomes, what do I think of this film, Split Second? Well, I have to say, I was taken aback. I think B movie is fairly accurate. It might be a little too kind, Dave. I would maybe go even like C movie, that kind of a thing. This movie is definitely not for everyone. I would have to say that. I do like the description of it being a dude's movie. It is not very politically correct. One thing that I do see in this movie is that I feel like this is definitely a celebration of those 80s action buddy cop movies. And would you agree with that, Dave, that that's kind of what this film is? It's an early 90s movie, but it really harkens back to that 80s style.
Yes, it's very much that kind of idea. It especially as the film moves on, it really reaches that point where it's almost kind of like, what if Mel Gibson and Danny Glover were trying to take on a supernatural monster serial killer, as opposed to taking on the more grounded real world threats that they deal with. But at the same point too, one of the things I like about this film is the idea that it does approach it with a sense of humor. So
Absolutely. Yeah. The humor is definitely there. And you know what I kept thinking about, Dave, when I was watching this was Hot Fuzz. Are you familiar with that movie?
yes, I love Hot Fuzz. That's a great movie.
Okay. So I love Hot Fuzz too. Now, one of the, to be fair, for folks that don't know, I spent 20 years in law enforcement, okay, in public safety. And so a lot of, a lot of cop movies, a lot of police movies and television shows are laughable to me, and they're not supposed to be, okay, because I don't think they're a realistic depiction of what law enforcement's like, what public safety is like, what it's like being a police officer. I just don't think they're realistic at all, and they just become silly to me, and that's unintentionally silly. I mean, they're meant to be serious depictions, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, that would never happen. Yeah, that's stupid. Now, what's interesting about this movie is because it is both kind of a horror and a science fiction film, and because you can kind of feel those homage aspects of it, like there's some real kind of, kind of crazy attempts at one-liners in this movie. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that came up, but you can see them, and that was a big thing in the '80s where they had like the one-liners and stuff. But the reason I think of Hot Fuzz is Hot Fuzz in a lot of ways, which by the way I highly recommend that film. I enjoy it quite a bit. Hot Fuzz is this sort of British idea, this sort of English idea of what would it be like to kind of live in an American 1980s buddy cop movie. You know what I mean? But it's set in England in a small town, and hilarity ensues because you can kind of think of that. Just put that all together. They're in a small town. Remember, most British police officers don't even carry guns. Most English police officers don't even carry guns. So it's very different, and then they kind of have to deal with that, and that's what Hot Fuzz does. Well, that's one of the more interesting aspects of this movie, because this movie takes place in a very dystopian future London. And because it's a dystopian future London, you don't have the traditional British Bobby thing where they don't have guns. Now they have guns, and they have big guns, and everybody has guns. You know what I mean? Because it's supposed to be this dystopian future. So it's kind of interesting to me because it feels like the writers, and producers of this film were like, in a lot of ways, they were like, like British guys who were kind of like, well, how do we make an American action film work in London? Because again, most of the police officers don't even carry guns. So it kind of throws that convention out the window almost immediately. And in this movie, they carry lots of guns. They carry lots of big guns. And that's something that's highly emphasized, the big guns. You know what I mean? That's a big part of the movie. That's one of the big parts of the movie, is where they start to arm up and realize that they need some bigger guns, and again, it's just kind of funny to me because this is an English movie and it was filmed in London. If you made a more realistic police movie that was trying to follow that '80s model, you immediately have that problem. Again, most of the police officers don't carry guns, although they do. They have armed response and things like that in London and other places in England. It's just not a big part of the culture, right? It's just not a big thing there. So it's kind of interesting to see what they were doing here, because I can see it. And I see that parallel between, Hot Fuzz, that was very deliberately comedic and very much is a comedy film. Whereas this one, it's kind of a little bit all over the place because it is action, it is horror, it is sci-fi. In fact, I think that's what it says on its description. But like you mentioned, it is also kind of a little bit comedic. And I wonder how much of that was meant to be that way and how much of it is a little bit unintentional because that '80s formula definitely had comedy. I mean, a lot of the classic Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liners and Sylvester Stallone one-liners are comedic. They're funny. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's a dark humor, but a lot of that stuff that they say, it is funny. I think of The Running Man. The Running Man is full of stuff like that, where he says, like he had to split, and the guy was like literally split apart or something like that. They have those kind of zingy, funny one-liners. And they do play with that in this film as well. I'll tell you, one thing that really did interest me was like, some of the cast, because although I don't know their names, I do recognize a lot of the faces of the British actors in this movie. And then I was just kind of shocked that Kim Cattrall's in this. You know what I mean? Like, I was just kind of like, Kim Cattrall's in this thing? You know what I mean? Because I think she was already a pretty big star even when this movie came out. and she's in it, and she has a very prominent role. So I was surprised by that, and I guess uh, that to me is definitely kind of a highlight, because I think this is when she's in like her prime. So we do get we do get to see just about all of her. I'll mention that is the plus in this film.
That's what I was saying. It's a dude's movie,
it's a
man.
dude's movie. That's
dude's
right.
Movie.
It's a dude's movie. We get to see Kim Cattrall's movie. So I'll just put it out there. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting movie. You know what I mean? That's the main thing I can say. It's an interesting movie. I do like some of the premise. This is right at the beginning, so it's not really a spoiler. The idea is basically global warming has caused a lot of the cities to start to become submerged, and London basically is almost becoming like Venice, right? Venice, Italy. They have crafts, and there's water in the streets and things like that. That's an interesting premise. One thing that I thought was really weird is that Rutger Hauer plays very American in this. And I don't know if you have any insight in that, Dave, or what that was. I don't know if that's part of that homage or whatever, but it was a little weird to me, because Rutger Hauer he's like Danish or something, isn't he? I mean, he's European, and isn't he? I mean, he's not an American.
Well, part of the thing that's interesting about this film, because I did look into the research a little bit into it. I didn't get too far into it, but I did, just to satisfy my own curiosity before talking about it here on the show. This script was originally written to take place, I think, in like LA. Like it's meant to be set in America. And then they just basically took the story, they did some rewrites, and they basically set it in London. So I think the idea with Rutger Hauer, for example, is he's very much that 80s American cop, and they just leave it. Because that's the thing I like about this film, and that's also the thing I think would put a lot of people off. The idea that they just take some of these concepts and they just let it play out. They don't really worry. Like, for example, like, the main villain, the serial killer monster, we don't get a lot of backstory behind how it was created, how it came to be. We get theories and allusions to what they think it represents and how it came to be, but we don't really spend a lot of time with where the monster comes from. The monster just already exists.
And another interesting thing is, we have this poster, which this is the official poster, right, Dave?
Yep. This is the one that actually I think this too was used on the VHS, but the original poster looked pretty much just like this.
It's funny because this is kind of a spoiler poster. You're actually seeing the creature more in this poster than you see him in the film. In the film, you barely ever see him. You mostly see his teeth, the venom-like teeth, and the claws. You really never get a good shot of him like this. It's kind of confusing to me, because I've never seen the poster either, and I'm just like, you don't see the villain as much as you see him in this poster in the movie.
Yeah, but see, again, one of the things I like about this film, in all honesty, it is the inconsistencies and the way it creates the humor. Like, one of the first scenes you see of Rutger, where he comes in with the gun and he's the hero, he starts tough talking a dog. Like right at the jump of the film, like right off the bat, you've got Rutger Hauer tough talking a dog. And there's this whole bit with the cigars and the chocolate and the insomnia, and the idea that all of these things they've pushed him to this edge. But at the same point, you're kind of, and it's the weird thing, but I kind of get the illusion that a percentage of the psychotic nature of the film is just because you're kind of seeing it sometimes from Rutger's perspective. And his character is unhinged and on the edge. So, but that's one of the things I like about the film.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly is unhinged. I am going to do a little spoiler, but it's in the beginning scene. It's something that kind of tainted me a little bit, and it might have tainted me a little bit in the rest of the movie as well. And so this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's early in the film. It's very early in the film. So the scene you're talking about, when he talks to the dog, he's going into a nightclub. And he's going in this nightclub because he kind of feels like the killer might be coming back. The killer's been gone for a while, and he feels the killer might be coming back and might appear in this nightclub. Well, there's this scene early in the film, and there's this woman who basically is going to the bathroom, and I guess it's like a unisex bathroom. So she politely asks him, "Can you watch the door and make sure nobody comes in on me?" Very simple request, and he agrees to it. Well, the next thing you know, he gets distracted, walks away, and the target of the killer happens to be that girl in the bathroom, and she's murdered. And so immediately I'm like, this guy's a terrible cop. You know what I mean? This guy is a really bad, like not, like not badass. I mean, this guy is a terrible cop. He couldn't just stand at the door after he agreed to do that. And that kind of immediately kind of put me in this weird thing. And my guess is the way you took that is it kind of just shows how crazy he is and kind of unpredictable he is. But that kind of took me out of it. And that's the only spoiler I'm going to give because it's so early in the movie and it really made me feel like this guy's incompetent.
Well, and again, I'll come back to this idea. He's not a great cop. I mean, and if you, again, from the beginning of the film, whether he's tough talking the dog or not, because it's pretty obvious, at least I remember when I originally saw this film, right from the jump, it's pretty obvious he's not a good cop at all. Okay. And you're following his story not because he's a great cop, not because he's a great detective. You're just following his story because of his link to the killer. And I don't want to get too far into that, but he has a very specific link to the killer, and they try to play this concept off later in the film. And it's one of those things, I like the film, and I've always enjoyed this film since I originally saw it. But again, like I said, this is sort of like a buddy cop film where they fight sort of like a B movie monster. I mean, it's not a high budget, great production or whatever. But I think when you get to that point, when you have sort of a lower budget, maybe you can explore the idea of this guy's just a horrible cop, and the only reason he ends up saving the day is because he can sense where the thing is, because that's an important part of this movie, is that because of his connection, he senses where the killer is. It's not like he's great at detecting. It's just he can sense it. It's like, oh, it's over here. Let's go over here, and the whole film is driven by that, just the connection that the killer and he share. And but at the same point too, again, it's sort of like it's a dude film. It's a film for dudes. It's got a lot of guns. It's got some good-looking women in it. It's just one of those sort of. It's not an exploitation film because it could have pushed some of these concepts even further than it did, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But it's that it sits and it lives in that era. It's that weird movie that's sitting on the VHS rack in the Blockbuster, and you're like going, huh. I like Rutger Hauer. What the hell is this thing? And then you just watch it, and you're kind of surprised because you think it's going to be horrible, but you kind of have fun with it. I don't want to use the expletive deletive, but I love the scene where Rutger Hauer's partner realizes they need bigger guns. That's a lot of fun. I still laugh at that scene when he realizes, he's like, yeah, you're right. We need bigger guns, and then they're running around trying to find the biggest guns they possibly can, I
can't help but wonder if Simon Pegg is a fan of this movie, and that's part of Hot Fuzz, because Hot Fuzz has that same moment, where they start getting all the guns, Yeah,
it's just, that's the thing I think is really, really fun. And that's the thing I love about this movie. It's just fun, and it's silly at times. Again, Rutger Hauer's not a great cop. That's one of the, and that, like I said, that's one of the things I like about the film.
Well, that's Portronics mentions because of his crazy.
Yeah, exactly,
he's nuts.
Exactly.
And I can see that. It's one of those things that kind of just takes me out of it a little bit. And some of that stuff comes from my background. There's just no denying it. When I see films like this, even one thing that's good about this for me is because it is dystopian future and because it is, horror and sci-fi, I can have a little bit more suspension of disbelief. That does help. But that particular scene kind of, because it's so early, you know what I mean? It was just kind of weird to me. But I understand what you're saying, Dave. I think you have a totally valid perspective there, and it does make sense. And there are some funny scenes in this, like you said, the big gun thing, the thing about the partner and how often he has sex. I mean, that's kind of funny. You know what I mean? There are definitely moments where I was chuckling and things like that. And I think that was meant to be humorous. You know what I mean? So, um, I don't think this movie's for everyone. I'll tell you that, Dave. I don't think this movie's for everyone by any stretch of the imagination. But there are some interesting moments in this, and I do think that the creature itself was pretty interesting. You know what I mean? I definitely felt that Venom vibe that you're talking about. That's exactly what I thought when I saw that, especially the teeth. I
Right,
was thinking
right.
Venom 100%. So, and by the way, did this came out after Venom, right? Venom came out first, or which one came out first? Because I
Uh,
want.
well, I think Venom was probably a little bit before this, but so this might have taken some inspiration from that. But at the same point, too, it's important to remember that if you look at the design of the creature, I think the design of the creature basically there's a very specific image that H.R. Giger created back in the 70s. And I really think this is more heavily inspired by H.R. Giger's illustration than necessarily Venom. The allusions to Venom is, I think, just the teeth and the all black nature of the character in terms of the coloring of the monster. I think it you know what I mean. It connects it a little bit closer. Um, but it's interesting too about this film, and I'm trying to verify it, and I haven't quite been able to verify it yet. But if I remember correctly, um, well, here we go. It's right here. So I thought this was the case, and I was correct. So Stephen Norrington, who actually was the director who did Blade, he actually got his start actually doing creature effects, and one of his earliest films actually was Split Second.
Okay.
So Stephen Norrington actually worked in helping to create this creature. So there may have been a comic connection, just knowing that Stephen Norrington's involved too. But I quite liked a lot of Stephen Norrington's stuff. I think he gets a bit of a raw deal because of some of his later films. But um, I um, I really, like I said, I like the design of the monster, and it's just kind of a fun movie. This is one of those films I think that there's enough here, and it has a little bit of a cult following. If you had a modest budget, I think you could do a fun split second. You know what I mean? Sequel and kind of revisit these concepts and have fun with it. In a more contemporary manner and lean into the buddy cop action 80s idea even further.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking that on a previous episode we reviewed Crawl, and I talked about how, like, if I was like super rich and as my vanity sort of insanity project, like that one kind of like Howard Hughes kind of moment that you have once you're really well established, you've got tons of money and you start doing crazy stuff, I would make Crawl too. And I thought, you know what? Split Second 2 is Dave's Crawl 2. You know what I mean? Like, I could totally see that you doing a sequel for this movie if you had like the resources and the budget and the rights and all that stuff. That this would be your sort of crazy project.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd have a lot of fun with this thing, and because that's the thing. One of the cool things about this movie is the fact that we don't really know where the creature really comes from. I mean, we get some theories and some allusions to some things, but there's all the origin of the creature. Is it one of a kind? Is it part of a species? Is it like the predator? Is it part of a race and they come to an area where they can hunt? There's a lot of interesting ideas that could be explored within this concept. And I think the thing that's neat is that you've got a very interesting film to potentially buoy or hold up, that sequel, so that people go back and experience the original film. They go, wow, this is some crazy stuff. Now I can see where that other thing came from. So,
Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense. That definitely makes sense.
yeah. So the overall verdict is, I'm just going to tell you right now, You can stream Split Second. It's on Tubi. It's on Hulu. You can watch on Amazon Prime. It's available in a lot of different outlets. You can obviously rent it, just to watch on Amazon too. This is a fun movie. I recommend it just because it's fun. And I've always had a lot of laughs with it and just enjoyed it for what it is. I'm a huge Rutger Hauer fan. Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I've seen so many movies just because Rutger Hauer was in it, including this movie. But the thing that's interesting about this film is I always find myself revisiting it, coming back to it, and enjoying it. And most of the people I've showed it to, they end up becoming a fan. My brother and I, we've had so many fun conversations about Split Second because I introduced this film to him too, and he loves the film as well. I don't mean to speak for him, but we've had many conversations about this film, and I've always enjoyed it. So I'm going to say this is definitely worth checking out. Eric, what's your final verdict? Would you say that this worth checking out, or is this just a pass?
Well, I would say that it's definitely not for everyone. There's a lot of violence in this. There's a lot of gore. There is nudity as well. If you're into those things, you'll probably enjoy this. There are some issues with some of the. It's not exactly the pacing; it's the timing. There's some timing issues in this film. Sometimes the lines to me are delivered in a way that I'm just kind of like, I feel like they fall a little bit flat, like they're meant to invoke something that they just didn't invoke for me. So that's really what I'm going to say. I don't think this film was for everybody. Did I like it? There were things that I liked about it. There are definitely things that I liked about it, but there were things that I really, really put me off as well. So the bottom line is, I think if you're into those kinds of things, if you like those kinds of movies, we talked about like the buddy cop formula, things like that, then I think it's for you. If it's not, if you don't like those kinds of things, yeah, I would say hard pass.
All right, well, there you go.